Good morning. Today 9.4b is solved by factoring. Last day that we look at this, yesterday we looked at the general idea of solving by factoring, which was that we should be able to take an expression and set it up where you have something in here times something in here equals 0. Your problems yesterday were easily set up to where this was already factored, that was already factored, and you just followed the steps. After you had it like that, we simply said this has to equal 0 or this has to equal 0. We solved both of those things and got our answers. Today we're going to actually look at the actual work and close up the work for Chapter 9 this year. So when you see solve this problem, again, you have options here. You could use a quadratic formula, which would be your ABC, or like I said, if you think you can solve by factoring, set it up, multiply as to be 35, as to be 12. Those numbers are 5 and 7. I'm not going to go through all the work because hopefully you did that yesterday, but those numbers are 5 and 7. Should be a positive 7, positive 5. I noticed there's nothing attached to W, which means that the answers are W plus 5, W plus 7, and then don't forget your equals 0. Now that it's factored, that means this times that equals 0, which means we should be putting W plus 5 equals 0 or W plus 7 equals 0 and going through the work to finish it off. And that's it. And again, you can even check this by putting negative 5 squared plus 12 times negative 5 plus 35 to see that you get 0. You can even pull that back here, put your negative 7s in there. And I'm not going to check all of them, but just to show you that I'm not lying to you, that it does work. Alright, so that's pretty much it. Again, as long as you have your factoring under control, you should be in good shape. Solve z squared plus 2z minus 24 equals 0. Again, you want to solve this, but there's a z squared, which means that you can try factoring. Here we're looking for numbers that multiply to make negative 24, add to make 2. Because that's negative 24, you want the numbers to be 2 apart. Those numbers are 4 and 6, with a positive 6 and a negative 4. Again, there is nothing attached to the z, which means we can use the observation shortcut, which again is not really a shortcut. It's an observation that every time you do that, those numbers just end up there anyway. And then of course now you do your z minus 4 equals 0 or z plus 6 equals 0 and solve as usual. Alright. Again, you could even use a quadratic formula if you don't like the factoring thing and you get to a standardized test and they just want the answer and you don't think you can factor it, then use a quadratic formula. The thing about it is, I taught it out of order, but your first option in terms of time should probably be factoring, because if you're learning the math like you're supposed to, factoring should be easier. And then whenever you can't factor, you check the quadratic formula because that has all that stuff going on. But anyway, this time we want numbers that multiply to be, I think that's 184 times 45, so negative 180, and add to be negative 11. That means we want these numbers to be 11 apart. To me, that would be 9 times 20, because 9 times 2 is 18, 9 times 20 is 180, and they are 11 apart. That would make a negative 20 and a positive 9. I think, thinking while I'm doing this. But again, 180, because 2 45s would be 90, double that, that would be 180. Yep, so let's try it. 4m squared plus 9m minus 20m minus 45 equals 0. Now if you remember, I have to do this because there's a number here, so I actually have to do the full part. Just don't forget the equals 0, otherwise what will happen is you'll end up factoring and stopping, and we don't want the factors, we want the answers that come from the factors. So keep that equals 0 with it as good discipline. Then you bring off your m, getting 4m plus 9. Here you can take off a 5, getting 4m plus 9. Again, I'm not going to walk through those steps because I suggested over the break that you do it. I suggested before the break that you do it, but you got to have your own factoring under control. But once you have that factoring, and some of you who did not know how to factor before we left school understand that I am not lying to you. This is actually pretty easy to do once you know how to factor. Add 9 divide by 4, add 5, and that is it. Alright, so those are the ones that you'll probably see that should not give you an issue, again, because you know how to factor them. Sometimes you'll see something like this and you'll say, well, I don't know how to do this because there's 4 terms. But remember, if there's 4 terms, the first thing you should try to do is to split it. So we end up with this here, which means, and be careful because you don't just take off an x. Both of these have 2 x's in them, and you're left with x plus 5 minus, you can take off a 9 with x plus 5. You then take off your x plus 5 and are left with x squared minus 9. And there's 2 ways to do this. Actually, I guess I'll do it the way that I would do it in real life, which is you take your x plus 5 equals 0. You take your x squared minus 9 equals 0. Now this one's easy to solve because we've done this a few times. But if you remember, as long as there's an x squared with no x, you could actually use algebra. The trick is you have to remember that whenever you square root to get rid of that square, that you must put a plus or minus on it. So these answers are actually negative 5, 3, and negative 3, because there's 2 answers here. Another thing I told you a while ago was that that 2 meant that there were 2 answers. This means that there's probably 3 answers. So again, whenever you see that highest power of 3, there's 1, 2, 3 answers that potentially work, and you want to keep that in mind when you see that on your homework today. E. The difference between E and F, as you'll see and as it is on your homework, is that I know it says solve by factoring, but you don't just go in and factor, because you have to imagine that x squared is like an elephant. Pardon my art class for a minute. It's got big ears, trunk, on a boat. And if x squared is an elephant on a boat and there's a bunch of small mice over here, if this elephant's on this side of the boat, what it's going to do is dump the boat down this way, which means that everything on this side of the boat is going to tumble to the side of the x squared. So I say that stupid thing just to make sure you understand that when we look back at the problems that we did, the reason we could solve this is because here's your elephant and everybody is on this side of the boat. There's nothing left over here. Here's your elephant. Everybody is on this side of the boat. Even here is your elephant, and everybody is on this side of the boat because there's nothing left. So what I'm saying is, whenever you see this later on, you have to remember that the only way you can start this problem is by getting everybody off to one side. So this actually turns into x squared plus 3x minus 54 equals 0. And once you have that equals 0, now you can follow the strategy that you have. That is the one trick in solving by even with quadratic formula. You can't do that because, again, it has to be equal to 0. But again, just keep that in mind, because otherwise you'll make some mistakes and you'll get frustrated. Nothing's attached to x, so it'll be x minus 6, x plus 9. So x minus 6 equals 0, x plus 9 equals 0. And there we go. And I will prove this one just to show you. 6 squared, I'm not going to do both, plus 3 times 6, hopefully I didn't do it wrong, minus 64 should equal, because I plugged it into here, negative 10, and notice that it does. So again, the trick here is anytime you see something on that other side, do not start to factor, do not do any kind of quadratic formula or anything until it's actually everything's on the same side. On these questions also, let me just do this, bring this back real quick. If you see one of these and it has like x squared plus 3x 0 or whatever equals 5, that is a weird type printout. That means that I programmed it wrong, because I programmed this a year or two ago, and I have a few mistakes out there. If you see that, just miss it, hit similar question and move on, because that is a misprint. That's something that should not be going on, but on occasion it does. But anyway, same thing here. If something weird pops up, have a 0 anywhere, I would just miss it and then hit new question. Also on this, on the computer, is probably going to be some ones, but again, you'll be fine as long as you just follow what you know to do, which is, again, here's the elephant. Everything needs to come over, which means X needs to move in with the 2X. 13 needs to move in with the 75. Once you do that, you are now ready to do what we've learned how to do, which is multiply to be negative 88, adds to be 3. The numbers I know to do that are 8 and 11. Again, the nice thing about this is that the x squared has nothing attached, which means I can do x minus 8, x plus 11, set both of those things equal to 0, and finish off the problem. And there's my two answers. Again, this says there should be two answers. There's my two answers. Alright. So, other than that, that is it. Like I said, you have your Math Excel assignment up. Go ahead and knock that out, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Good luck. Also, remember, if you're going to talk to me, make sure you have a picture of your work on the computer as well. Not that I don't trust you, but sometimes what people do is they copy something wrong, and then I go through a whole bunch of work to try to figure out what you did wrong, and just to find out that you copied the original problem the wrong way. So yes, I want to see your work, but make sure you take a picture of the computer with that also. It's just 2 pictures instead of 1, but just make sure you do that so I can actually verify before I start working, because I will not try to answer your question without seeing the computer first, because otherwise it's a waste of my time. And not a waste of my time, it could be a waste of my time, and I don't like doing that. So again, when you email, when you text, whatever that might be, take a picture of the computer, take a picture of your work, send it to me, and then I will check it out and get it back to you as soon as I can. Thank you, and good luck.